All right, welcome to English 101, week 11. This is our reading lecture for this week, and we're continuing on with the short story Sonny's Blues. It's going to be a very brief video, but just want to remind you, if you haven't read the first section, go ahead and read the first part of Sonny's Blues. Of course, we'll be basing an essay on this later in the semester, so take a look at that. Also, a couple of links in here if you're interested in learning more about James Baldwin, the author of the story, very interesting man who died in 1987. Was very active in the 60s and 70s and even into the 80s up until his death, I think, as a writer and a public intellectual. What Sonny's Blues about? If you wanted to get a really kind of an informal, kind of, I think it's a little bit funny summary of the story, you can take a look at this YouTube video. And then just a little bit about the questions again for this week. Page 494, I want you to focus in on a story that Sonny's mom tells him for our journal this week. Why do you think the narrator remembers this story? And then after the funeral, his mother's funeral, on page 496, the narrator talks with Sonny. That's his younger brother. Sonny tells the narrator he wants to join the military even though he's too young, and he wants to be a jazz musician. The narrator tries to convince Sonny not to join the military and questions his desire to be a musician. So I wanted you to think about this conversation with the brothers, the older brother, the narrator, and the younger brother, Sonny. Have you ever had a similar conversation with anyone when you try to convince them to change or do something different with their life? How did it go? How do you imagine Sonny and his brother, the narrator, feel during their talk? So someone's trying to convince you of something, or maybe you're trying to convince someone else of something. How does that feel? My thinking is, as a teacher of rhetoric and writing all these years, it's very hard to convince somebody of something once they have their mind made up, whether that's a political thing, an advertising thing with different products we choose, or in this case, a personal relationship and trying to convince somebody to change their life. But think about that. Reflect on that if you've ever had somebody try to really persuade you. Maybe it's happened before where somebody has persuaded you, or maybe you've had this experience of successfully persuading somebody who's close to you, or a friend or family member. But think about that. This is our journal for this week. On page 502, we learned that the narrator's daughter has died of polio. Have you ever heard of the disease polio? So it's kind of an interesting thing because, back in the 1950s, that was this very scary thing because there was no vaccine, no cure for polio that we know of. A very famous president like Franklin Delano Roosevelt, I think, suffered from polio back in the 1930s, and there was just no cure for it, right? So he was very sick. How do you think that death affects Sonny when he loses his daughter? I mean, imagine that. So these are very serious themes. Like I said, trigger warnings. I don't do trigger warnings per se, but maybe I should just, like I said, do a general trigger warning because we're reading serious stories about serious things. Lots of literature is like that. So just be aware that that's happening this week. And then again, for the summary, I posted this in Blackboard. Hopefully I have the right questions there. But as always, I know students will remind me of, hopefully, if something's wrong with these questions in Blackboard, but a little more involved for our reading summary. And as I look at this, I might have actually posted the wrong question, so I'm going to make sure I correct that before I post this video. But I hope everybody's having a good week, and as always, let me know if you have any questions, and hopefully you can go on now and watch the rhetoric and writing video if you haven't already, since this is such a short video. But thanks again for watching this, and good luck as you continue your reading with Sonny's Blues. It's a tough story, but I think it's worth it when we get to the end of it. It's got a lot to say.